Welcome to the Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Podcast series by Fips Consulting. In this podcast series, I speak with international guests who share their experience on supplier diversity and inclusion. Today's guest is Suesal Arieli. She is the founder and CEO of Arieli Company. I met Sus at an IBM event I hosted for women-owned businesses to find mentors to support their business growth. Sus, I know you're incredibly busy, so thanks so much for taking the time to join my podcast.
It's a real pleasure, Andrea. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Sus, do you want to share what your company is doing?
Sure. So we were established almost 10 years ago. We're a management consultancy with a UK and US office, and we do succession planning, global leadership programs, and strategy and solutions for supplier diversity.
Okay, so people might ask themselves, so why is she inviting her competitor to the podcast? So maybe you can share the difference of what your company is doing and Fips Consulting.
Absolutely. And so Fips Consulting, coming from a background of working at IBM and the rich corporate experience you have, you really help companies build the corporate ecosystem for supplier diversity programs to be successful. In terms of my background and our work, what we're really focusing on is making sure that those supplier diversity programs are scaling diverse suppliers. And what I mean by scaling diverse suppliers is transformatively growing them in order to fortify the supply chains of corporates.
Great. Thank you so much for explaining to the audience. And I think, we're a great match to support each other's solutions and not being in the competitive area.
Yes. Although I will say a little bit of competition is always good, but your business and ours definitely swim in different lanes.
Right. So can you tell us what role has supplier diversity played in the growth of your business?
Thanks so much for asking that question, Andrea. So it's well known that business leaders from underrepresented and marginalized groups are consistently underestimated. And the work of great associations and individuals in supplier diversity helps with correcting that bias or uncalibrated judgment. And I should also add the work of great corporations who really are committed to supplier diversity or business diversity. So that commitment means that businesses who might otherwise overlook us and our services actually can see that we can meet their needs and beyond, and that we can then continue to grow as a business based on merit and the return on investment that we provide to our customers. And so just to give you one example, in 2020, we started our partnership with Cummins. So there we've provided consulting to them on supplier diversity strategy and also high impact solutions to fortify their pipeline of suppliers. So this work has since expanded. And through doing that work with them, it of course provides a great case study for other corporates considering our services to see the value that we can bring to them.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much to elaborate that. And I think that's one of the big advantages of running supplier diversity and inclusion programs. It's the whole, the innovation and all the different thinking and the out of the box and the different challenges that diverse owned businesses might face that corporates do not face.
Yes.
So I know you just returned from the annual BDR summit. So for those of you who do not know BDR is the $1 Billion Roundtable, and it was created in the US in 2001 to recognize and celebrate corporations that achieved spending of at least $1 billion with diverse owned suppliers on an annual basis. So what were the main themes that came up at the BDR Summit this year?
Absolutely. Very happy to share. And just so that the listeners out there have an idea of the scale of BDR's impact, in 2022, the BDR collective spend exceeded $123 billion. So it's a huge amount of money, and that's just in 1 year. So What were the key themes there? I'd say the key theme of this conference was about impact beyond spend. And that's really about tracking the performance of what corporations spend on supplier diversity through spend to what is the economic impact on the community, on employment and growth contributions to the global economy. So that was one of the key topics. I think another thing that I have to mention that was huge in terms of the summit this year is that BDR expanded its ranks to 39 members through the induction of 7 new companies. Abbott, Amazon, Bristol Myers Squibb, Caterpillar, Citi, Duke Energy Corporation and ExxonMobil. So right now, BDR has 39 corporate members and they have 6 of the Fortune 500's top 8 corporations at the table. So it's a really exciting time for supplier diversity. And just one thing I'll add. Yeah, it is. And I think something that was discussed in part at the summit was talking about supplier diversity in terms of business diversity. Yeah. And that really links supplier diversity very closely to how it can drive business performance and growth. And I think that that's a very important lens through which to understand supplier diversity.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. But I think, right now we see the BDR in the US only, and I'd love to see something like that also in Europe. And I think there are discussions going on. So hopefully we will be able to see something like a BDR also in Europe very soon.
What I will say, Andrea, is those corporations, even though the summit was in the States, in the beautiful city of Chicago this year, the impact for those corporations is international. Like there's no question about it. Those corporations' efforts are not purely focused on the US, but throughout their global supply chain, ensuring that they integrate diverse suppliers in all regions within which they operate and beyond.
Right. It's just a matter of being part of the BDR means that you need to spend the $1 billion in the US, but most of these companies which do that are or do have a global supplier diversity program or effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I know you have offices in the US and in the UK. So what do you think, or what do you see as the main differences in each geography in supplier diversity and inclusion?
So I think the main differences that I see are the business community in the US has a much higher proactive engagement in supplier diversity than in the UK. There are also federal requirements in the US about engaging diverse suppliers.
Right.
And of course, in some of the conversations we've had, Andrea, of course, we've talked about the history to supplier diversity in the States. But as we discussed also before this podcast, we talked about the bill that's now in Parliament, but I'll leave you to comment on that.
Right. So you mentioned the history, and I think that's a crucial point here, that in the US, supplier diversity and inclusion started way back in the 60s. So they're already pretty established there. Whereas in Europe, we're still in an early phase of companies learning and implementing supplier diversity and inclusion. So the paper that you mentioned in the UK that's going through Parliament right now is encouraging public sector to buy more from small and businesses and social enterprises.
Yeah, it is.
So in your experience, what things in the supplier diversity program have the biggest impact for vendors and what doesn't?
So there are 5 things that end up having the biggest impact for vendors. Number 1 is a consolidated global approach backed by metrics. Number 2 is applied capability building. And here I'm talking about not just theory or classes, but going beyond that to give practical expertise and practical application of capabilities to vendors in any program. Number 3 is succession planning and creating the right culture for growth. And I actually had a great conversation about that with Javon Coleman from Worldwide Technology a few days ago. Number 4 is razor sharp business growth strategy. There are some fantastic organizations out there doing things to help diverse suppliers grow with that in mind. Just one example I can think of is the work that Lehman Sowell of Sowell Law Partners does. He's also a legal counsel to the BDR. And number 5, I would say a customer-centric approach. What do I mean by a customer-centric approach in supplier diversity programs? I mean really thinking from the lens of a diverse supplier. How can you help them grow their business? How can you help them better provide what your corporation needs today and tomorrow? So those are the 5 things I would say. However, I think there's one final missing piece that's incredibly important. To run a successful supplier diversity program requires the right approach within the corporate.
Yeah. And that's also something that I always mention, the last point that you mentioned here is having the whole corporate engaged, or making sure not just procurement knows about supplier diversity and inclusion, but also all other stakeholders within a company, and that they understand what's going on, like for diversity and inclusion efforts within a company in the workplace.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think to expand on that, I think there are 3 main things that I see again and again and again as taking the right approach to supplier diversity within corporates. Number 1 is internal to the corporate, developing a culture and a company that's invested in supplier diversity and that connects those dots, as you said, between different stakeholders, between different functions. So it's not something that is solely worked on within procurement, for example, or within DEI, for example. Second, a long-term commitment to suppliers. So after you've vetted the suppliers that you're going to have and made sure that they can meet your business needs and deliver for you, it's making sure that you don't spend high with them 1 year, then it goes down massively in the next year. Just making sure that you have that long-term commitment, which is going to support them to grow, which means they can play a more valuable role in your supply chain. And number 3 is using great partners. So just very obviously, people like you, Andrea, and Fips Consulting, making sure that you're continually sense checking your supplier diversity program with external providers that have a pulse on what's happening at other businesses, that you can benchmark, that you can learn from best practice, and that you really can work out, as Fips Consulting does, how can you create an inclusive, sustainable and ethically operating supply chain? And notably for corporates, it's really useful when you specialize in supplier diversity and inclusion for 1st and 2nd tier efforts.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much for the free advertisement here.
Well, you're good at what you do, so.
Thanks. Yeah. But it's totally right. I mean, there are several factors which come into play, and just having sent or worked with a diverse business with 1 PO and a quick one-off thing is also important and is also good. But if you want to have a sustainable long-term growth of your supplier diversity and inclusion efforts, it needs to also be on a long-term basis with your diverse suppliers.
Yes, I agree.
So unfortunately, we're already at the end of this podcast. It was so interesting to talk to you, but still, I have one last question, or is there one last thought that you would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the question, Andrea. So the last thought I'd like to leave the audience with is we've seen the statistics on diverse spend and the positive impact it has on communities, on employment, and on value creation at corporates. Right. Where we see a challenge is that there is a scaling problem that is faced by diverse suppliers, and this hasn't yet been fully unlocked by diverse supplier spend. And to fully unlock all the benefits of diverse supplier spend, so impact on communities, impact on employment, and value creation at corporates, we need to tackle this scaling challenge. And this is going to require some new innovative approaches to aspects of supplier diversity programs, or in some cases, to how a corporate is running an entire supplier diversity program.
Right.
So I think really the last thought is around that. And it really is about engaging the best of our intelligence, the best of best practices, the best of partnerships that we can form to unlock that scaling challenge, to really fortify supply chains, introduce more innovation to them, and to create those wonderful benefits that diverse supplier spend creates.
Right. Wow. Great last thought. And I totally, echo what you just said. It's so much about scaling and making sure that it's not just a tick boxing exercise, having supplier diversity and inclusion efforts, but you really make sure that you also live supplier diversity and inclusion and make sure that there is an impact and not just tick box.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that in that I will say tick box is tick box, and great companies and transformational growth usually isn't driven by checking boxes.
Thank you so much. That's a great last sentence. And Suze, it was great talking to you. And thanks again for taking the time to share all your insights and information about your company and your experience with supplier diversity and inclusion.
Pleasure. Thank you to you. And thank you also to all of your listeners.
Thanks. If you want to know more about Arieli Company, or if you want to make your supply chain more inclusive, reach out via fipsconsulting.com or Fips Consulting on LinkedIn. Listen to my next episodes where I talk with more experts about supplier diversity and inclusion and the impact it has on their business. Contact me if you have inputs or topics around supplier diversity and inclusion that you would like me to talk about. Thanks much for listening. Bye, Diverse Owned.